Hello there, and a very good afternoon to this week's Ukraine War Q&A with Professor Michael Clarke. Professor Clarke, good afternoon to you. Great to see you. Sorry we're a little bit late for today's episode, but you may get a bit more time on the back end, depending on how we get on with all these questions. Thank you once again for submitting your questions as always. You can, of course, submit questions as we go along if anything the good professor has to say sparks your interest and you want to find out a little bit more about that. You can do that via the YouTube page that you may be watching on, or on our website if you're watching along there on skynews.com. So, Michael, let's just get into this. And we've had lots of people asking us about these Tomahawk missiles. It's been reported for the past few days that Ukraine could be about to get these US-made cruise missiles. Why don't we just start with sort of what the Tomahawk missile is? Take us through some of the details about this weapon system.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it came to prominence, a cruise missile, in 1991, in the Gulf War of 1991, and suddenly it seemed like a revelation because they were so accurate. Mm-hmm. So they hugged the ground, sort of 30, 50 meters off the ground.
Oh, wow.
That's very low, very hard to defend against. Different sorts of navigation system. In the years since, they can be inertial navigation, which is where you just pointed at the target, mm-hmm. 100 miles away, whatever, GPS guidance or military versions of GPS, or it can be terrain following, so it can look at the terrain it's going over.
Yeah.
So it can switch from one sort of guidance to another.
In flights as it's going along.
Yeah, and they travel, they're not that quick, not that fast, I mean 550, 600 miles an hour, mm-hmm. and which is only the speed of an airliner, but up at 30,000 feet. 600 miles an hour at 50 meters off the ground looks pretty quick. Yep. and they're just very accurate. Mm-hmm. Not a huge warhead, it's about a 450 kilo, 500 kilo warhead, about 1,000 pounds, which is a conventional big-ish warhead. Now, you wouldn't use them against a very big target, or you'd need several, but one of them will actually destroy a facility or a building or a radar site. Mm-hmm. So because they're so accurate, they do, I was going to say comparatively little damage. It's a relatively small blast for a very useful area of damage.
Right.
And they can carry nuclear weapons, but they can be nuclear armed, but conventional armed. So it's either high explosives, or they can be given other sorts of warheads like cluster munitions and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Most of them, they were first developed to be launched by ships and submarines. Very useful, and I mean our Royal Navy uses them on submarines, right. And can use them on ships. The US uses them a lot on ships and submarines. There's an air-launched version as well. Obviously just from the wings of an aircraft, that's easy. And there's the most recent is the ground launch version, mm-hmm. which the Americans have only adopted the last couple of years. And if the Ukrainians are to get them, I'm pretty sure it'll be the ground launch version they will want, because they don't have the ships or submarines to launch them. Mm-hmm. They don't really have the aircraft to launch them. Well, they do, but I think it would be more difficult. I think they'd go for a ground launched version. And if they get them, I mean, if the US is prepared to sell them to European NATO, who then give them to Ukraine, if that's the case, then they would give the Ukrainians, what's always called deep strike. Yep. Capability to strike deep, 1,500 miles, almost 2,000 miles into Russia.
Absolutely. So got some details here, because this question gave me the chance to do a deep dive into ballistic missiles as well. And you're right, yeah, it has that terrain contour matching, which means it can fly very closely along the ground, about a range of about 1,500 miles, which let's compare it then to the other cruise missiles that the Ukrainians have. So we know that they have the homemade, recently made Flamingo, which they say has a range of about 3,000 kilometers.
Yeah, that's right. It's about the same.
Yeah,
about the same.
They've got the Storm Shadow or Scalp, which is much shorter range. I was surprised at how much difference there is in the range.
The reason Storm Shadow and Scalp are shorter range is because they're launched from aircraft. So you've got the aircraft range that you can add to it. So that's the idea. It's not going from A to B. The aircraft takes it to point A1 and then it launches. So that's why Storm Shadow can be shorter range but still very effective. Yeah,
absolutely right. So that has a range of about 155 miles. And obviously there was always the ask by the Ukrainians to get this terrorist missile from the Germans, which has a slightly longer range. And again, similar to a Storm Shadow. But
it would be, yeah. And the thing about Taurus, I mean, the reason that they wanted, if you just look at the specifications, it looks remarkably similar to Storm Shadow and Scalp. Mm-hmm. But the warhead is just better. there would be, for reasons we've talked about before, it's got a very clever warhead which knows exactly when to explode as it is burrowing into a piece of concrete or a building or a piece of, or the ground underneath something. It's the cleverness of the warhead and the sort of fairly heavy warhead. But again, Storm Shadow could do that job, but the warheads are not as clever as Taurus.
And just the last point then, I think, on this, on the Ukrainian domestically produced one, I'm told that they have a maritime launch cruise missile called the Neptune R360, which you'll tell us sank the Moskva back in
the first few months of the war, and that was the first operational use of it. Nobody in the public domain knew that they had it until they used it. But of course, they also used it at the time with some intelligence help and I think decoy help from Western countries. There's different arguments about what that was. But the fact is they produced their own missile and they sank the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet.
Just a question here. So it's described as an anti-ship missile. Does that mean it's ship-to-ship or is it ground-to?
It's ground-to-ship.
Okay.
They can be ship-to-ship or ground-to-ship. The reason things are called anti-ship missiles is mainly the guidance mechanism, because going over the sea is a different sort of challenge to going over land, just because of the distances, because there's no terrain you can map and so on. And the Neptune was an anti-ship missile to begin with. Also, anti-ship missiles have to be heavier, because if you're going to do damage to a ship, you need just a bigger warhead.
Right.
You've got to do more. You've got to carry more. But they've now developed a ground-to-ground version of the Neptune, so an all-ground version of the Neptune, as well as a sea version. So they've got the Neptune, which is a pretty heavy missile. They've got the Flamingo, which is a really good long-range cruise missile. If they get Tomahawks, if they get them, and in some numbers, then they really would have a considerable deep strike capability.
Right, let's move on to the questions, as those were mine. Here are yours. Ms. N has this question for you, Michael. How would Russia respond if Ukraine were to get Tomahawks? And then the inevitable question, could nuclear weapons be back on the table?
Only insofar as they're always on the table.
They'll say it, won't they?
They always say it, yeah. I mean, they already have responded in a way, because Peskov, who's the Kremlin spokesperson, I mean, he has said, look, if Tomahawks were given to the Ukrainians, we're not sure if the Americans wouldn't really be shooting them. I mean, it would draw America into the war, he says, because we're not really certain that the Ukrainians could operate them. And if we saw Tomahawks coming towards us, we'd probably have to assume that the Americans were really firing them. Now, that's rubbish. But what he's doing is saying that if Tomahawks are used, then in theory it brings the United States into the Ukraine war. And he's playing, of course, to the MAGA base of President Trump, who says, whatever you do, don't get drawn into the Ukrainian war. So in a way, they already are responding. If Tomahawks were supplied, we'll see a lot more of that, or hear a lot more of that, to say this is illegitimate, it's risking war, it's risking World War III. World War III could become nuclear. It's the standard line on everything. Every time the West makes a decision that the Russians don't like, they say we're threatening European war, whilst they make an aggressive war in Europe on their neighbour.
Yeah. Give us the clarity on that as well then, Michael. I mean, the Ukrainians do rely on targeting help from their allies, don't they, already?
Yeah.
Would it be a material difference to start using the Tomahawk system versus the other systems that they're using in terms of their targeting assistance?
No, they don't need any more targeting. I mean, they need the coordinates, that's the point, and they need... It's not just the coordinates. I mean, the Ukrainians know where buildings are in Russia, just as the Russians know where buildings are in Ukraine. But it's the dynamic targeting. So either things coming together at a particular site, vehicles congregating at a site, targets that are only available for a short length of time, or targets of particular commanders. And the Ukrainians have had some success in targeting at least 15 or 16 senior officers in the earlier days of the war, because they were able to use dynamic targeting. And that you need sophisticated intelligence, which is looking at what's happening all the time, as well as combining it with AI tools, which is knowing where individuals are, because you can put together their itinerary. That they're always there on a Wednesday afternoon, or they're there every third Wednesday afternoon for a particular meeting, and you can check the meeting. So you've got a pretty good idea that this particular car going into that car park is carrying General so-and-so. All those sorts of things. The Ukrainians can only do a certain amount of that for themselves. The indications are at the moment that the Americans will continue with that targeting assistance. Maybe not down to the really special level, maybe not. But so far they haven't stopped doing it. They've suspended it twice in the past in order to make a point, and it's had a big effect on the Ukrainians. But they haven't suspended it yet. And we'll see what happens when the next iteration of the Alaska peace talks comes back to the surface, and the whole thing is drifting away. That's all failed.
I mean, they're meant to be meeting by now, weren't they? A couple of times,
all
three of them.
They should have met by now.
And
as we've said, in our podcast before, I mean, Trump is zigzagging his way out of the war. The question is now: is he completely out of it, or is he still keeping one little bit of interest in it? But he's zigzagging out of the war, and so far doesn't look as if he's going to pull the plug on all of the intelligence, which the Americans collect most of it anyway themselves. So it costs them nothing to give it to the Ukrainians, to give them access to it.
A question on that targeting, because as you were answering that, it got me to thinking, is there a case sometimes with the Ukrainians and perhaps with the Russians as well, where they know where a target is and they're choosing not to strike that target?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're making decisions as to which general to go.
Yes. I mean, targeting is as much about what you don't do as what you do, because you may say, well, leave this character now because we think he will lead us to better targets in a couple of days' time, or leave him because he's one of the negotiators that we might talk to, or leave him because he's one of the agitators to undermine Putin's rule or whatever. There might be all sorts of reasons why you don't go for a target, and there are targets that you don't want to go to. I mean, the Ukrainians have avoided targeting inside Russia anything that would actually affect, they think, the external price of oil on the world market. So all of their targeting in Russia has been directed, as far as they possibly can, at Russia's own internal refining capacity for petroleum and diesel.
So, and I suppose it's just another element of the modern warfare in 2025. That you battlefield's just open, isn't it? You know where everything is, basically.
Yeah. People who do this are called targeteers.
Is that right?
They say, you are a targeteer. Targeted. And they used to say years ago, I've heard military people say this, in the old days, you always knew where your enemy were. I mean, say in the medieval period or right up to the 19th century, you knew where the enemy was. I mean,
that field behind that hill.
Exactly. You could see them, or dispatch riders came back and said, there's 5,000 of them over there. You knew where they were. You weren't sure if you could destroy them. Now it's the other way around. In principle, you know that you can destroy them. You just don't know where they are.
Fascinating.
Because everything's dispersed. You don't really know where is the locus of where's the guts of the enemy? Where's the centre of their force? That if you hit that, you really hit them hard. You don't know. If you knew what it was, at least in principle, you can destroy it. In the old days, so it's a reversal.
Interesting. All right, question here from Mickey. Now, you've answered a bit of this, but I want to do this question anyway, because the way that Mickey has framed it, described as one of Michael Clarke's biggest fans, which is always nice to hear, isn't it, Mike?
That's very nice.
And it's definitely not your mum this time. So this question is about...
Sure? Yes, is that mother?
It's definitely not this time, Michael. So look, this is about Tomahawks. Now, you've answered where they may launch them from. You think if they get them, it will be a ground-launched Tomahawk missile. In your answer earlier, though, you mentioned that they could put them on aircraft, but probably not. I mean, they got the F-16. Why would they not mount them on?
It's a question of the weight. They're pretty heavy. They'd need. They had the same thing with Storm Shadow. They couldn't get them on. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't get them on an F-16. No, I'm sure they can't. But an Su-24 or Su-25, the old Sukhoi, because they had to adapt the Su-24s and 25s, which are all Soviet-era bombers, to take Storm Shadow, and they could take one under each wing in either side of the fuselage. But it's partly a weight and it's partly a size, because cruise missiles are about. I've seen a few of them. They're about 20 feet long, something like that. They're big. They're pretty big. And so, yes, they would have to be carried on some of the old Soviet-era fighter bombers that the Ukrainians have. I mean, it can be done, but if they were to get a consignment of 200 or 300, say, I'm sure they would rather have a ground-launched version that they'd move around on vehicles and fire from a vehicle.
And with that kind of range, you're still going to have an effective area that you could strike with it. You don't get struck right
because an air-launched cruise missiles, a TLAM as it's called, a Tomahawk land attack missile. You've got the range of the aircraft, but in the case of Ukraine, they wouldn't want their bombers to be up for too long or going too near the Russian border, because they haven't got so many that they can afford to lose.
And as a ground launch system, obviously it's going to be on wheels. You're going to be able to move it around. What kind of profile do they then bring? They're then a target themselves, aren't they? Of course.
Yes, they would be. Yeah, and you have to shoot and scoot, as they say. That's the principle. So you release your Tomahawk, or maybe 2 or 3, and then you get out of it quick.
Wow.
Move away fast. And there's different ways. I mean, on land, you can disguise these vehicles pretty well. I mean, you can disguise them as containers, as agricultural trucks. There's all sorts of things.
Well, we saw what they did with Operation Spiderweb, didn't they? Those
That's right,
trucks that suddenly opened up and it's full of
so
drones.
no, it was full of drones.
That's not what you want to see.
I mean, the Ukrainians are not lacking in inventiveness.
No, they're very ingenious when they come to this sort of thing. All right, next question here from Liam. And you've kind of touched on this as well, but let's do Liam's question anyway. How much damage could a Tomahawk do to a building area in Moscow, say?
Yeah, well, it would destroy either a part of a building or a whole smaller building. I mean, a 1,000-pound bomb. So they're the sorts of bombs. They're like the bigger ones, like the glide bombs that the Russians have been throwing at the Ukrainians themselves in the buildings. The thing about Tomahawk is because. And this is what it was always famous for in the Gulf War of 1991 and then 2003, is this terrific accuracy that they can get. They can go through a window. If they aim at a particular window of a building, they could go through a window in order to take down only that bit of the building and not another part. Yeah. If you think that the target you're after, or the leader, or whoever it is in the eastern part of the building, you can just take down the eastern part of a building. So as I say, they're not hugely destructive. They're just very accurate. And if they're used properly, they can be debilitating. They're a weapon for decapitation. Right. And in 2003, I mean, the United States fired, getting on for 1,000 Tomahawks. I think it was several hundred, 800 in 2003. Mm-hmm. And they had an opportunity, they thought, before the offensive began in 2003, to decapitate the Iraqi leadership. And they were wrong. But they went early. They went about 24 hours early with a whole series of Tomahawk strikes in downtown Baghdad, as they say. And they destroyed a lot of facilities, but they didn't get the people and the commanders that they wanted because they weren't in the buildings they thought they were in.
Yeah, and the last time they were perhaps used by the US was against Iran back in June. Operation Midnight Hammer, they used Tomahawks there to hit the nuclear facilities.
How many did they use then? 50?
It says 2 dozen. Over 2 dozen.
Oh, yeah, over 2
that submarines.
Right, yeah, 30 or 40, something like
Incredible.
That. And they've used them against the Houthis in Yemen. It's a very popular missile. I mean, it's been around for 30-odd years. It works, and it's hard to defend against because it travels so low to the ground comparatively quickly.
Fascinated by the tech that's that old, but it's still very versatile and very useful. And I imagine if you retrofit it now or add more things to it in terms of AI, how much
it's
better
it's in about 4th or 5th generation now. They call it Block 1, Block 2, Block 3. And I think the Block 5 Tomahawks have got all sorts of things that you wouldn't have dreamt of in Block 1. Right, but it's still the basic thing. It's a 20-foot long cruise missile with a big warhead on, or a 1,000-pound warhead on the end.
Before we move off cruise missiles, do the Russians have anything comparative to a Tomahawk?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, they've got the was it KH-101? They do the same sort of thing. Yeah. And they're air launched. So yes, they've got the same things. They're not as accurate.
I was going to say is that the accuracy levels.
No, and they don't have anything like the numbers,
right.
Which is why they haven't used them as much. I mean, the Russians rely on the Kinzhal missiles now. These some of them can be hypersonic. And their new missiles are very good, but they don't have very many of them.
Right.
I mean, they're still really coming off almost the prototype production line.
Interesting. All right, let's move on to questions about the war now. There were more, of course, aerial assaults overnight in Ukraine. Let me see, how many have we got here? At least 51 injured, 5 people killed, 51 injured over the past couple of days. 49 Shahed-type drones. We launched 23 ballistic missiles. The Ukrainians say they intercepted 44 of those drones, while 5 missiles and drones struck several locations.
That's a light attack these
days.
It is
compared to what it's been recently. I mean, we have
500 or more.
So since we've been doing this, we have now reached the point which I said to you in the early days of us talking about this, where these swarm attacks are happening. They're getting close to 1,000, and that is just it feels kind of mind-blowing. And the terror that there must be. The one at the weekend, I think, was 600 or so. It was over 12 hours. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine all the way through the night?
It keeps everybody in the shelters or in the Kiev tube station, in the metro stations all night long. And so people get depressed and fed up. They can't sleep very well, and then they've got to go to work the following day, and the following night the same. It's what happened to London in the Blitz. 78 nights successively of bombing every single night. Yeah.
Okay, here's the question anyway. So, Britannia 89. Russia keeps claiming to have won more land, but people like Keith Kellogg, who is the US envoy for Ukraine and Russia, yesterday said they were losing. What is the truth, in your opinion, Michael?
No, it's a good question. Keith Kellogg has been making some very upbeat statements recently, as has Donald Trump, indeed, about the Ukrainian performance. I mean, the balance has not swung the other way. The pendulum is not swinging towards Ukraine recovering its territory. But undoubtedly, the Russian offensive over the summer, that's been going all summer since about March, has more or less run out of steam now. And they are making more progress, a little bit of progress, but nothing that is strategically significant. Mm-hmm. They haven't made any progress in the north. They thought they could take the area up in Sumy. I mean, when they finally threw the Ukrainians out of Kursk, the Russians clearly intended to try to keep on going to the city of Sumy, which is pretty close, and they haven't been able to. They haven't been able to take anything else in the north. They've put pressure on the area of Kupiansk up in the northeast, and I think the Ukrainians are struggling to hold Kupiansk, and that would be reasonably significant if they lose it over the winter, because that would be a jumping off point for the Russians to try to take back Kharkiv, where they were thrown out of there.
Yep.
Kharkiv Oblast, Kharkiv region, in the autumn of 2022. Then coming round the famous semicircle of the clock, from sort of 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. If you think of 6 o'clock as Crimea,
yep.
And 7 o'clock is where Odessa is, I suppose. And coming around,
there's a way of thinking about it.
Exactly. Coming around to about 4 or 5 o'clock.
Yep.
That's where the Russians have been making their biggest efforts. And again, everywhere is under pressure. So Shavizhar has still not completely fallen, although they occupy most of it, but can't use it yet because the Ukrainians are still fighting for some of it in the outlying areas in the north, in some of the old, I think it's the old steelworks and some of the coal mines north of Chasiv. And then in Pokrovsk, which is important.
Glad you mentioned
it. It's been more or less surrounded to the north, surrounded to the south, but the Ukrainians haven't yet withdrawn from Pokrovsk. I mean, I can't imagine that they can hold on much longer, but the Russians still can't make them withdraw, so they haven't yet. And our famous fortress cities, from Slavyansk right through to Kostiantynivka, and Pokrovsk is a fifth of those. There's 4 cities, and then there's Pokrovsk a little bit further away. They are still what they were. And although the Russians are physically quite close, they're still a long way away from being able to take them because of the fortifications in the way, and the terrain is not easy for them. It's uphill. I mean, these cities are all on their own sort of plateaus. So the Russian offensive has sort of run out of steam for the time being. Interestingly, the Russians are recruiting fewer men than they are losing. I mean, they're recruiting just under 1,000 a day, reportedly. They're losing over 1,000 a day. And they're sending a proportion of these new recruits to a strategic reserve in Russia. We don't know how many, whether it's a third of them, half of them, quarter of them, we're not sure. But some of these recent recruits are going to a strategic reserve. So the Russians obviously are thinking now about next spring, about building up a new force which might be better trained with better tactics to come forward again the other side of the winter, let's say in, let's guess, March or April next year. But if that is what their intention is, if that's what they're thinking, then they've just got fewer troops on the front line, even though they outnumber the Ukrainians. I mean, they've got 750,000 troops, and the Ukrainians have got about 450,000, and not all of them are available for the front line. So the Ukrainians are always outnumbered. But I don't think the Russians have got enough to break through in a strategic sense.
Interesting.
So there we are. I think the winter will see another air war, a bombardment of Ukrainian energy facilities. The Ukrainians, each winter gets harder for them, but each winter they sort of get through it. And there are certain things going their way in the wider world in terms of support from Europe, other initiatives being taken, more weapons arriving, more finance being arranged for them to buy and develop their own weapons. So I think the Ukrainians, if they're prepared to carry on, and they seem to be, I think they're in a mood to say, hang on for one more winter, and things may get better. I think that's the mood in Kiev, even though they realise that they are under real pressure.
Yep.
But for Russia, there is no prospect at the moment of of a real strategic change on the battlefield.
Fascinating. So just on the numbers that Russia has in the field at the moment, Putin, just in the past day or so, has ordered the conscription of 135,000 men.
Yeah. Bigger than normal, yeah.
Yeah, the largest drive in 9 years, it's said, to get them into the field, I guess, for the next fighting season. And I would just recommend for everyone, if you can find it, it's on the Financial Times, an opinion piece by the writer Yuval Noah Harari. I actually posted it on my social media, so you can find the link there, where he talks about the fact that Ukraine is actually winning this war in many aspects. The fact
in a strategic sense, I'm not sure winning, but they're not losing.
They're not losing the war.
They're losing tactically in many ways, but they're not losing strategically. But on the other hand, I'm wary of saying the pendulum has swung, because it hasn't yet.
No.
But it's not swinging towards the Russians.
The Russians thought they would take the whole place in, 3 or 4 days, and it's not happened.
Yeah. You know, the other thing, Kamali, which is interesting about this conscription, is that the Duma, the Russian parliament, was passing a law last week, or they're discussing it, which means that they're going to pass it, in which it's called sort of a pre-conscription arrangements, where people have to check in with their local office, have a medical, do all the clerical work, to be told what unit they will be allocated to, which is a local unit, and then they go back to their own job. So it's like dealing with the admin first, so that when they're conscripted, they can go straight in. But of course, this has created a lot of fear amongst the younger men in Russia that next time they go to their office, they'll just be whipped straight away to
press-ganged off into
the base camp. Yeah. And so a lot of them are finding reasons not to go to this preparatory meeting, because they think it's the thin end of a wedge whereby they're going to be conscripted, whether they like it or whether they like it or not, as early as possible. So they're going through these pre-conscription procedures, and they're very, very, very suspicious of it.
Yeah, they're probably not wrong that they will be soon sent to the fight. Let's move on to a question here from Gareth Mooney. He said, is the rare daytime drone attack on Dnipro a sign Putin is ramping up his aerial assaults? Yeah,
I don't know if the daytime attack is so significant, but yes, attacking Dnipro is, because that's an important city. It's not part of Russia's current front line. It's just a city in an area which, in the oblast of Dnipropetrovsk, which the Russians never said that they wanted to take, but it now looks as if they do want to take it, because why wouldn't they? They want to take as much as they can. And it is a symptom of the fact that the Russians, they've ramped up their drone production. I mean, so have the Ukrainians. But I mean, they've got so many drones coming on stream now that they're going to use them as much as they can. And I think we'll see...
Day and night.
Yeah, day and night.
And the terror as well that must do to the civilian population, to know that, night you're not safe, but now...
And on the front line, everyone tells you that this whine, it's not, in the Second World War, the drone of the Doodlebug, the V1s, used to worry people, and that was quite a loud drone. In this case, it's like a whine. It's like a sort of a moped engine somewhere away. It's not very deep.
There's some audio that I've heard actually online recently of an attack on Kyiv, I think it was, where it's a terrifying noise.
And it really upsets children, of course. And so it has this psychological effect on experienced soldiers as well as on civilians. Yeah.
Let me get into your sort of military history knowledge, because of course those back in the day German dive bombers, the Stuka, had a noise put into them, didn't they, to make them more terrifying? Do they put noise into the drones to make them more terrifying? No. Or was that just the noise?
No, Ju-87s, the Stukas, yeah. And yes, their wings were adapted so that they screamed, because they understood that was part of the terror. Yeah. And the drones, to my knowledge, are not given a sound. I mean, they have a sound. A lot of the designers would like the drone to be completely silent, because then it would be even more worrying if there was a grenade seemed to come out of nowhere. So I'm not aware that drones have been given any noise to make. I spoke to a pilot years ago who was involved in the Burma campaign in the Second World War, and he was flying a Mosquito, and he said, the only thing I ever did that made a difference to the war was to fly every night up and down behind Japanese lines to keep their artillery quiet, to give our lads a night's sleep.
Wow.
He said, because they could hear my Mosquito, his aircraft buzzing up and down, they couldn't use their artillery.
Yeah, because it's spotted.
And 20 miles away, it gave his mates on the ground a chance to get some sleep. He said, that was my job.
Wow, just to
make a noise, make a noise behind the artillery unit.
Absolutely right. Yeah. All right, let's move on to these questions here from Michael. What military action do we expect before winter comes? It's coming hard now into Ukraine, isn't it? Where are we? October the 1st?
October, yeah. End of the month, it'll start. It gets wet, and then it'll get cold. So it'll get wet and muddy, and then it'll get cold, and we don't know how cold it will be, and that will be the case until the end of February, early March. I do think there will be some things happening. I think the Ukrainians, they'd like to spring surprises. They know that has an effect not just on the Russians on the front line, if they can, but also on Western perceptions of how Ukraine is getting on. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that they've attacked in the last few weeks a number of radar stations and air defense facilities, particularly in Crimea. And again, as we've said before, you get a certain amount of satisfaction out of taking down air defense systems, but it's only worth doing if you then do something with the gap you've created.
Space,
if you can create a gap in the curtain of air defense, then you want to put something into the gap to go and get something even more valuable. And the Ukrainians, certainly in the southwest, at sort of 6 to 7 o'clock on our clock, have been engaging in quite a lot of what the military might call shaping operations. And the Russians must be quite worried about this.
To what end then, in your sort of estimation? What would it look
wouldn't
like?
be surprised. Well, I'm guessing totally, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't try some sort of big attack into Crimea of some sort, air attack, or maybe an amphibious assault of some sort. A sort of strategic raid.
Like they led up to Kursk to try and show that they can fight back.
Exactly, in order to unsettle the Russians somewhere. I wouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, given what the Ukrainians have now got in terms of deep strike, if they don't go for the Kerch Bridge again. I mean, the Kerch Bridge has been attacked successfully twice, and of course the Russians build up their defences around it. So every time there's an attack, the Russians, plug that gap, whether it's a seaborne attack, an aerial attack, or whatever. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Ukrainians don't find another way of hitting the Kerch Bridge, because that's one of the ways of unsettling not just the Kremlin, but unsettling people in Crimea, because they know they depend on that to escape. It's their only way out if things get really bad for them in Crimea.
And the symbolism as well for Putin of that bridge being destroyed.
Huge symbol. Right? Yeah, really upsets him when the Kerch Bridge is attacked.
That's such a shame. All right, a question here from Mick. Of course, Sir Michael, have you been? Is there something? Have you got news, Michael? Have you been to the palace recently?
Kamali, look, the only knighthood I will ever have is the keep my ears warm in bed. That's all.
Soon.
That's the only knighthood I'm entitled.
Yeah, well, let's wait and see. I love when we get chuckles from Alison. We'll wait and see. So, Michael, I watch your show every week from Annapolis in the US. Question, what are the chances that Putin stages a highly visible false flag attack on Moscow as a precursor for an attack on the Baltic states? He asked you to explain what the false flag attacks are, first of all. But there is... according to the Institute for the Study of War, which we trust and rely upon, they say that recently the Russian intelligence service have been claiming that Ukraine is about to do a false flag attack in Belarus on Polish infrastructure to then implicate Russia as a precursor to try and start something.
The Ukrainians might actually hit something in Poland in order to get the Poles to blame it on the Russians or the Belarus. I mean, that's a false flag attack. I mean, do you know, every time there is some disaster or every time there's some sort of big attack, somebody always says, the victims did it to themselves so they can blame everybody else. I mean, 9/11, the famous 9/11, I mean, the story got around very quickly that 9/11 was actually perpetrated by the CIA and Mossad working together, to actually create this.
I've read the articles.
Exactly. And so that the Americans could then blame
excuse to go
everybody in the Middle East and attack the Middle East because they wanted the oil. All that. I mean, it's ridiculous stuff. But false flag attacks have got a long history of creating an attack that you can blame on yourself. Blame on somebody else, so you attack yourself in some way.
Before you go too far, has there ever been an actual false flag by a power that's been used as a precursor?
Yeah.
Think of one?
The most famous one that is well understood was Russia. In 1999. It was the FSB attacks on apartment blocks.
Oh, the Chechnya.
That's right. Yeah, and it was all blamed on the Chechens, which it wasn't.
Yes.
There were a series of explosions, almost a few days after each other, in 4 apartment blocks in Moscow and a couple of other cities. And then the FSB were caught red-handed in Ryazan, trying to create another one, red-handed. And at that time, this is 1999, there was enough of a free press in Russia for people to investigate this and get to the truth. And within days of those attacks, the Chechens were blamed, and Putin, who had just become the Prime Minister of Yeltsin, launched his war on Chechnya, which is a vicious war. Yeah. And the outside world is and I, again, talking to intelligence people over the years and talking to the historians of intelligence, there's no doubt in the outside world that these were false flag attacks. And the person who said this was the FSB. It was an FSB officer called Alexander Litvinenko.
Oh my.
As a result of which, he was assassinated in Britain, right, in 2006.
Yes. Polonium, right? Of course.
Yeah,
My goodness.
it was Litvinenko. He called out his old. He said, I'm an FSB officer, and the FSB attacked our own and killed over 300 people.
Yep.
Injured well over 1,000.
To start a war.
And it started a war. Yeah. So that's a very famous false flag attack. Blame it on the Chechens. Yeah.
I feel like I should get you to answer the question about Putin's potential to do that. I mean, you've just laid it out that he's done it before, so
he's got
form, right?
Yeah, he's got form in doing it.
Okay.
But you've got to be careful because a lot of everything that happens, somebody will claim it's a false flag attack.
The internet's made that worse, I think. I mean, this is for another conversation, but I think
so. You do have to be careful. I mean, the one that's going round and round and round is the sabotage of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Yes.
So did the Russians do it? I think probably, but did the Ukrainians do it? Did the Americans do it? There's all sorts of stories have gone around about this. It looks as if at least one Ukrainian national has been arrested, and a couple of others are on the run. The facts seem to be zeroing in on a group of Ukrainians, which doesn't necessarily mean it was the Ukrainian government, but it does imply that some Ukrainian nationals are involved.
Well, yes. There's I just furiously Googled, so just to make sure I was certain about it. Yeah, Germany are seeking the extradition of a Ukrainian man arrested in Poland over the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline.
So
just in the past.
The investigation is zeroing in on a group of Ukrainians.
But again, as you say, the nationality doesn't necessarily tell us
or
whether they were agents of Russia.
We have to be very careful what we say. What you say about any of these cases because there's so much misinformation that kicks around. But yet, false flag attacks, yes, they exist. Yes, they are tried. Occasionally, they really work very well or can work very well. And every event, somebody claims is a false flag attack.
It's unsettling in the extreme, isn't it? Especially for a journalist who's meant to be based in truth and fact, to then never be able to trust the things that are in front of you until you can verify them.
Kamala, your job doesn't get any easier.
It does not. And as I say, this is a conversation for another time, but the internet, social media has made it all the harder to do properly. All right, let's move on to a final question here from Yusuf. It's about drones. Just to remind everyone that there are European leaders meeting in Denmark at the moment, talking about
informal meeting of European leaders, and there's going to be a European Security Council meeting, which is the informal one, which Britain is involved in, I think, tomorrow.
Yep.
So all the Europeans are coming together on an ad hoc basis, which is what crises do. You forget about the procedures, just get together and talk and decide what you're going to do. To talk about a drone wall of some sort across the whole of the frontier with Russia.
What do you think of that as an idea, as a drone wall?
It's fine if you can do it. I mean, the question is...
Even feasible, Michael?
It's a series of different technologies. So it's monitors, sensors, other drones and aircraft that will be patrolling if necessary, quick reaction responses. But I mean, we've got a very long border to look after. If you're looking at,
all the way from Finland. I mean, 600 miles, isn't it? Finland?
I mean, all of that border, plus the border right down to the south. And Hungary is saying it won't be part of it. And so that would leave a hole, except that the bit of the part of Hungarian territory that borders on Ukraine is pretty small. So I'm sure the Ukrainians would say, look, put it on our territory.
We'll do that bit.
Have 10 kilometres of our land if you want your sensors on our, and then we could complete the thing quite well. So again, I mean, just leave the Hungarians out of it. If they're going to be a nuisance, which they are, then just ignore them. I mean, Ukraine will always cooperate in something that is so obviously in their interest as well as ours.
I mean, look, sensors being tripped is one thing. We know if the drones are they're making incursions into NATO airspace. The question is what you do with those drones.
That's right. The response wasn't very good. I mean, it was quite a big response. We had aircraft in the air and all the rest of it.
But no shooting down?
No shooting down because we decided... I mean, some of them ran out of fuel. A couple of the drones in Poland might have been shot down, but I think only a couple. Most of them just ran out of fuel. And we know that the response has got to be a lot better. And I've been talking to some RAF pilots recently about what can you do. There's a whole series of things you can do. And a lot of it relies on the pilot. He or she has got to make some quite careful decisions when you're up there, sitting opposite a Russian aircraft or a hostile aircraft, but a Russian aircraft. And you go close enough to, first of all, you've radioed and they haven't responded. Then you go close enough to make hand signals. And some hand signals are universal. And then you've got this issue, well, what do you do next? And they say, well, why don't you show them your belly? I mean, the belly of the aircraft, that is, not your belly. And you you lift up the belly of the aircraft so they can
show that you're armed.
You can see what arms you've got, so they have a good look at what you've got on board. Meanwhile, your friend, your oppo, is behind, so you always go in twos, and your mate is behind, so your mate can destroy them if necessary. But then it gets quite dangerous. So then if they still don't respond, what are you going to do? Your mate can turn on their target selector.
And then they'll see that.
So they know, the aircraft knows then that there's a firing solution by somebody half a mile behind who's got you locked on. That's pretty frightening, I think. And these aircraft carry machine guns. They don't need them, but they carry them specifically for this purpose, to fight with tracer. So they fire tracer bullets. And so they could they could fire tracers ahead of or above as a warning shot. Or they could fire, into the tail of the aircraft. This is getting very dangerous now. Yeah. And that would bring the aircraft down, but give the pilots a chance to eject. Whereas if your mate launches an air-to-air missile, the aircraft will just blow up 2 or 3 seconds later. So it's getting really dangerous by the time you start to think about these things. But here we are now in a situation where these are the things that they are considering. These are what operational pilots, you've got British pilots in Typhoons, up in Estonia, and when they do their operations, these are all the procedures they go through.
It's like the red line, but the red line feels quite wide. There's lots of gradations within that redness.
And the other thing you've got to work out, this goes back to the controller as well, and as somebody keeps saying to me, the controller will be sitting with a lawyer very close. Right. The legal expertise is right next to the controller.
One of our colleagues, Sean Bell, used to be that person.
Exactly.
Have a lawyer
he knows more than I do about doing this sort of stuff. But at the base, they'll say, what track are these hostile aircraft on? If they're just flying past at 30,000 feet, well, that's not terribly worrying in itself, other than it's a political challenge. But if they're lower, and if they're flying towards a city or flying towards a military installation, then you really do have to get them off that track. And so that's much more difficult. And so a lot of it depends on the common sense of a pilot and what the pilot is telling the base about what's going on. I've made signals and they're not replying, or they're replying with waving little flags at me. What do you want me to do?
Yeah. It's just incredibly difficult.
It's getting, these sorts of games which start as kind of, Top Gun games. You've seen it all in Tom Cruise and Top Gun. But they very quickly become really dangerous once you start thinking about locking on weapons, firing tracers as a warning shot.
Well, Mr. Fredrickson says the most dangerous period since the war. So we are on the final question, and it's about drones. It's from Yusuf. And the question is, how can you tell the difference between a commercial drone and someone flying as a hobby or with a sinister intention? I'm not sure. Probably don't tell the difference between a Shaheed and like a commercial, like a hobby drone. But like if it's a quadcopter that has a grenade on it, you might not be able to tell until it's too late.
Correct. Yeah, if you're talking about a Shaheed, which are pretty big, they look like Delta aircraft, look the size of a small private aircraft, then you're dealing with a serious player, not a hobbyist. But if you're talking about a quadcopter, those are the things that closed Gatwick Airport for quite a long time. Was it 2018 and then 2023? I think there were 2 big closures, and nobody's, as far as I remember, nobody's been arrested for that, because I think whoever it was just played about and caused a lot of problem. So, the only thing you can do is what the Danes have done this week is ban all drone flights in, I don't know if it's over Copenhagen or wider, but they've just put a ban on the use of any drones while they're having this meeting. They don't want any disruption. And so that's all you can do. And that is a restriction on the use of hobbyist drones. But, the stakes are getting too high to be too precious about it.
I think we can do without hobbyists flying their drones, or perhaps news crews flying their drones for that top shot that we love using. Yeah, we can do without that while there's such a threat on NATO territory. Right, Professor Clarke, thank you for that. And thank you all for watching. We've gone well there, 40 or so minutes, as always. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you, as always, Michael. I think our schedules will align next week, but I'm not going to make any promises that I can't keep. But we'll talk again very soon, and hopefully you guys can join us again when we do. Thank you.